Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone. First of all, wish you a very happy New Year.
Same to you, ma'am.
Mm. So, I hope that the New Year brings with it lots of dreams and the courage in all of you to pursue those dreams. So today we will be talking about qualitative research. This will be the last lecture in the types of research designs in research methodology. After that, we will be starting off with analysis of quantitative data from next lecture onwards. And this one will be a bit theoretical for all of you, but that said, it is important to know about this kind of research as well, because sometimes in the computer science domain also, when we are trying to understand something in depth, we need to do qualitative research as well. So in today's lecture, we'll be discussing about the general idea of qualitative research, the goal of qualitative research, and mainly discussing the 6 kinds of qualitative studies, which are mainly case studies, ethnography, phenomenological studies, grounded theory studies, narrative inquiry, and content analysis. So I'm not sure if anyone of you has done anything in this area. Anyone who has certain amount of experience with or has heard about these things before? Okay.
Now,
So
I've studied in my, I've done a project in my management, right? But
hmm,
not exactly these studies will, I've, yeah, ma'am. I have
so
done survey analysis and all type of things from survey type of things or one-to-one interaction with the shopkeeper
okay.
and all that, yeah, personal interview, yeah. Hmm.
And you wrote down the report also for that, for the interviews and its
Yes, yes,
findings.
yes, 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 yes. And a form and all that, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Very good. So oftentimes what happens is, as researchers, we tend to focus too much on quantitative analysis and development of softwares or algorithms, and things that are easy to see in mathematical form. But the larger perspective of our world is informed by the nature of studies called as qualitative studies. So for example, in ethnography we will see that when you are whichever book you have read about a particular area in which the culture of the place has been described by the researcher, that constitutes as an ethnographic study. So usually it should not be a choice between quantitative or qualitative study. Both the kinds of research designs help us in informing us evidence and improving our understanding of the real world. It actually depends on what type of research question you are targeting, and based on that, your research design is developed. So, as I've mentioned before, to develop a complete understanding of the phenomena, we need to dig deeper even after the quantitative analysis is done. And that's where qualitative research comes into picture. This reminds me of an example. So I think in 2014, yeah, in 2014, I was working on a paper related to domestic violence and how it affects the lives of women in India. And it was all quantitative analysis. But that time I was sharing my room with a woman who was married, and at night I was writing my paper, and then she started sobbing. And then I asked her what was wrong. And then she had said that in my own room there was this woman who was suffering from domestic violence. And when I heard her story, and then I went back to my research to understand what the data was telling me, it all made a lot of sense. So, in your research, also, you will often face that quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis both provide a fuller picture. There's another example I want to tell you. So, in last year in 2019, I was involved in a study which was studying the BD workers. BD, you must know what it is, and it was in the Tripatur. It's an area in Tamil Nadu, and there we had gathered data from people, using forms and surveys and all. And I was putting down the details, extracted from those forms in Excel sheet, and there was a section in the questionnaire in which they were also asked to share their experiences about the work and would they like to improve their source of livelihood. So basically the project was on livelihood. And after reading their narratives and the truth about the lives they were living in those circumstances, trust me, the analysis of quantitative data started to make much more sense, because now I was not looking at data points only as numbers but as people behind those numbers. And then the understanding was much more clearer after understanding the qualitative aspect of the research. So, in this kind of research, we collect various forms of data and examine them from various angles to construct a rich and meaningful picture of a complex, multifaceted situation. So, the thing is that reality in real world is very complex phenomena, and it's a very multi-layered phenomena. And looking at data provides us one important bit of the information, but there are several pieces of the puzzle that need to be connected together for the whole to make a lot of sense. And in that area, qualitative analysis comes up. So what you do is you read about lots of theory about that area, talk to people, and then try to sort of identify the themes which emerge from your theoretical analysis and try to explain a phenomena in the matter of these themes. So, one aspect which is very important in qualitative analysis is the simplification of the observed phenomena, which is not the goal, but the issue is studied from multiple dimensions and layers. So, we are not trying to, simplify the situation, as we know that reality is very, very complex. And given a qualitative data, one researcher might analyze it in a different way, another research might analyze in a different manner. So there's a lot of subjectivity which is involved, which is not involved when it comes to quantitative analysis, where it's mostly objective. So in computer science, we sadly don't find much of qualitative research data, but in fields like education, political science, history, and psychology, and especially anthropology, lots of qualitative study is done. In fact, when you read about a particular tribal area or particular rural area in India and how their lives are different from people in urban area, there's a lot of qualitative data which is involved. So at the outset, it would be nice to know the difference between two major types of research, qualitative versus quantitative studies. So in quantitative studies, usually we collect the data first and data analysis follows later. And whatever evidence we gather, we try to make the conclusion from it and possibly generalize the results to a larger population from the sample from which the sample has been drawn. Whereas in qualitative studies, it's a recursive and iterative process. You collect the data, you analyze it, then you inspect the data for possible patterns, and then you return to the setting to collect additional data. Because while you're inspecting the data for the possible patterns, there are other questions that might emerge during that analysis. And to answer those questions, you might need to go back to the research settings to collect additional data to help you clarify or contradict those patterns. And of course, a more thorough and detailed analysis of the data is very much required. Now, data in qualitative may or may not be quantitative in nature. Mostly it is unstructured textual data. So textual data is also two types: structured textual data and unstructured textual data. So when you are interviewing people or audio taping them or videotaping them, there's not a particular structure that is involved in the way people are talking. And as researcher, it is for us to reflect on what they have said and slowly try to categorize the different themes that are emerging from different people that we are talking. It is also called as thematic analysis. So, after getting a bit of foundational idea about qualitative research, let us ask the kind of problems that we can target using qualitative research. So, one of the questions could be what is the nature of culture of people living in Gadchiroli? Anyone heard of this place, Gadchiroli?
Near Nagpur.
Yes, ma'am. Gadchiroli.
Yeah, it's 170 kilometers from Nagpur. What have you heard about this place?
नक्सलवादी मतलब ऐसे सुना है मतलब बहुत।
Yeah, so you see, you're right. It's a Naxalite area, but there are people living over there, and their health problems are very unique from the rest of the country. I've had the fortune of visiting the place twice, living there for 1 month, and that area. If you stay and live, you will realize that culture is absolutely very different, and the beliefs and practices of people are very different. So, if I would have stayed longer in that area and would have been more interested to know about the nature of the culture of people living in Gadchiroli. Qualitative study is something I would like to do. It could be any other place in anywhere in the world. The second question could be, and these are just examples. So was it what it is like to live with someone who has Alzheimer's disease? Now, for this, perhaps what will you do if you want to understand what it is like to live with Alzheimer's disease? So, as if you were a researcher and if you had an assignment to understand how people with Alzheimer's disease live, what would be your first step? What would your thinking be like?
Ma'am, as far the disease is concerned,
Hmm.
Alzheimer is a problem of n- for loss of your mind, or you can say you cannot think properly, right?
Hmm.
Absolutely. This is a major problem of Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
And the major thing is what I think is the to treat that particular patient with a very much serious on a serious or delicately because he how he or she the reaction is very much matters.
Yeah. So if you were to go and study about the lives of people with this disease, what would you do? Set out to do?
Try to interact them with first.
Yeah. So you will reach out to people who are living with this health condition, and perhaps you will visit a couple of hospitals who are treating people with Alzheimer's disease and seek permission from their physicians, seek permissions from their caretakers. Again, informed consent is equally important in qualitative research. And after you have gained consent, perhaps then you will design an interview and then which can be structured or semi structured based on open ended questions. And then after every time you talk to the people living with this disease, you will gain deeper and deeper insights about their quality of life, the problems that they face, and perhaps after. So for good insights to emerge, at least 30 to 35 interviews are must. Then you can easily generalize the findings. Or there is something called as when repeated information starts coming up, interview after interview, then you can decide that it may be the time to end the interview. So in qualitative research, as the study progresses, as we know, the understanding of the phenomena is improved. And then, although we start from general questions in the beginning, we can develop much more specific questions, which can often lead to working hypotheses. Now, sometimes qualitative research can also be used to understand deeply about a population or about a phenomena and then help us to develop a hypothesis, which we can later on test using quantitative data after collecting that data. And even though the work sounds very theoretical, but it should not be assumed to mean that qualitative research is easy. In fact, it requires considerable planning and preparation. You know why? Because it involves a lot of critical thinking. It is very easy to think in terms of numbers and then interpret the numbers and play with numbers. But when it comes to analyzing text, this reminds me of lots of debates that happen on opinion polls or in television or the way politicians interact with each other. What are they playing? They are trying to analyze brutally or non scientifically what they are discussing. And that really is a very good skill. And in qualitative research, also, all this skill is very important. Um, and personally, I feel that I don't have that skill yet developed because I think last month I met a qualitative researcher who was working in an non-government organization, and the kind of views she had over, things of real life relevance and political relevance. So that really struck me. And then I proposed collaborating with her in qualitative research and quantitative research. And now she helps me gain a different perspective that I would not have gained otherwise. And I, as a quantitative researcher, try to provide her a different numerical perspective on things. You see, so qualitative and quantitative research both really, in a very solid way, help us to understand the phenomena under investigation. And to be able to do better in this, as with all the kinds of research, literature review is a must. We must have a firm grasp over previous literature which has already been published in the area. So, for example, if I were to study the nature of culture living in of people living in Gadchiroli, perhaps I would try to search any books which have been written about the tribal way of living or the social anthropology in this area or in general, so that I have a foundation on which I can try to think about how my question will be developed. And this kind of research really takes a lot of time. Most of the students in their masters uh, often do qualitative studies. So there are a couple of advantages with qualitative approach. They provide us in gaining initial insights about a topic which has not been very much studied or a very new phenomena, which is called as exploration. It provides us an avenue to reveal complex and multi-layered nature of certain situations, settings, and all these things, because truth, as we know, is not very linear. It's non-linear in nature, and data cannot always help us understand it. There is a deeper layer to truth, and pragmatically, qualitative approach helps in understanding that kind of description. We can also use qualitative approach to verify certain assumptions and claims and theories about real world context, and this will become clear as we go deeper into the different types of qualitative research designs. Another significant aspect of qualitative approach is the development of theory. Most of the theories, especially in the field of psychology and sociology and anthropology, involve a lot of qualitative study in which people after people are interviewed and observed very concretely by the researchers, and then researchers sit together trying to identify the different themes, and after reaching a saturation point they propose some theory, and then that theory can further be tested in real world after interviewing more people. And problem identification, it helps to uncover key problems or obstacles that exist within the phenomena. So I think I had given you this example of talking to people with physical disabilities. My intention to interview with them was very different. I was going to them to ask about what were the physical handicaps they were suffering when it comes to exercise, owing to their physical challenges. But I got to know something very different about these people, and they were more concerned about the mental health and emotional health of these people, and due to which their quality of life was suffering. So that led me to change my hypothesis and transform my hypothesis into, what is the nature of emotional challenges that people with physical disability face on daily basis, and how it impacts their ability to exercise in a public space. So this way, talking to people really helps. And when you go to them keeping some, not even if you have some idea in the back of your mind, it would really expand your learning in way, and then the way you look at data will considerably shift. The last part is evaluation. Qualitative approach, it helps in judging the effectiveness of particular policies, practices, or innovations. And this one is very important. As any country progresses, the kind of policies it is using to tackle a particular problem will stagnate over the period of time. Now, policy researchers, what they mainly do is they try to identify how this policy is being implemented and what are its effects, and if it is really able to solve the problem. So, for example, the example comes to my mind is reduction of, let's say, childhood obesity in India. and India is part of South Asian countries, and because I can assume fairly that South Asian countries are similar more or less in their demographics, people, culture, and eating habits. As a researcher, I set out to explore that how are the policies in these South Asian countries relating to India. So I would be doing a qualitative analysis of policies, which could be called as the policy analysis. And then in the context of the research outcome based on the six South Asian countries, I will be able to say something about how India is doing. And qualitative studies do not allow the identification of cause and effect relationships. Why do you think so? That is the case.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Why can't we use qualitative studies to study or identify the cause and effect relationships?
Okay.
So, what do we need to understand which one is the cause and which one is the effect in any experiment or any relationship? What is the that is required?
Ma'am, the significant data and the numbers for comparing them.
Comparing what?
I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but uh, sorry, ma'am, I can't.
No, that's okay. Good for trying, Shreyash. Anyone from MTech in last lecture we had covered. What do we need to establish cause and effect relationships? So we need an experimental research. We need an experimental research design to establish cause and effect relationships in which we divide the group into treatment and control and we do some intervention. And if that intervention affects one group and the absence of intervention does not affect, then we can reliably say that a particular independent factor which was modified in one group has led to change in the final outcome. So, because in qualitative studies we are not manipulating the independent variable or we are not manipulating the environment, which happens in experimental research. In experimental research, we are not just observing, we are changing or modifying some aspect of the experiment. And based on that, we will establish whether there is a causal relationship between variables. Whereas in qualitative studies, we are just doing observation and analysis without modifying any parameter in our environment. And because of that, we cannot establish cause and effect relationships in qualitative studies. Is it any better now? Clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. So, with that, we come to our first kind of qualitative research, which is a case study. It is also called as idiographic research. Basically, okay, let me start this way. When I use the word case study, what is it that comes to your mind first?
Understanding of a particular case or a particular problem, then
Hmm.
insights from that particular study.
Yeah, can you please give an example, Shashwat?
Suppose, ma'am, I can give an example from FMCG industry.
Hmm.
There's a brand called Procter and Gamble and a brand called Pantene shampoo,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So where they have used, I've studied an article on that, where they have used a qualitative research to understanding why this not performing well in the year
Hmm.
2012 or 13.
Okay.
So from by doing some analysis and by studying that particular case, so people from that brand has start comparison with other brands like HUL or any other brand or Marico, and where they saw they definitely work on the qualitative and the quantitative data as well, where they are lagging and where on the schemes and the offers, and then they come with a proper solution.
Very good. Very good example.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else wants to share some example of case study they know of? Okay. So as pointed out by Sashwat, case study generally involves studying of a particular individual, program or event for a defined period of time. Example could be studying the nature and course and treatment of a rare illness for a particular patient. And for example, if you are familiar with New England Journal of Medicine, usually diseases for which there is no treatment and which appear in very very rare people. Doctors, when they first see a patient with a disease for which they don't have any medicine or they don't even have knowledge about what they are seeing in the patient, what they do is they perform a thorough case study on that patient to understand what is happening to those people. The second example could be educator analyzing the instructional strategies used to teach high school history. And another could be a political scientist trying to study the origins and development of a politician's campaign as he or she runs for public office. So in all these examples, we are very much particular about the number of people we are going to study. Case study, as it involves, it's not a sample of the population. So you are not going to sample people out of the population and then going to study them. No, you are going to identify specific cases. They might be similar or they might be different than each other, and try to identify what are the patterns or what is the information that you are able to gather from them. Sometimes you might be interested in knowing about more than one case, in which case the case study would become a multiple or collective study. Now, usually, what happens is, I think it happens in MBAs. Sometimes, as part of curriculum, students are given case studies to analyze and give answers to various questions based on that case study. One case study that I can remember is understanding how McDonald's is able to become so profitable as it is. So there was this case study, So after understanding this case study and reading the book of the founder, Ray Kroc of McDonald's, things become really very clear. So that is how case studies is done, and it's important. So what happens mainly in case studies is that you collect extensive data on individual programs and events through the means that you can. It could be observations, you could interview these people, or you could visit the reports about a particular organization you are trying to do a case study on, and various past records and audiovisual materials also. So first, unlike quantitative data in which analysis in which you are trying to gather the data points of qualitative research are unstructured and mostly textual in nature. And the idea is to analyze this piece of information to gather insight about the phenomena at hand. And sometimes knowledge about context surrounding the case or cases is very important because that helps to understand what is happening among the people. So, for example, I'll give you a very simple example. I want to understand the choice of women in different cultures to the kinds of exercise. So suppose if I am focusing on, say, women who lift weights as means of exercise, how does it differ in India and how does it differ from countries in Middle East? So the culture of countries in Middle East is very different, and their women may not have that much for freedom to go outdoors. In fact, I had a friend from Iraq, and we were having a discussion in the class, and he would say that in his country, women were not allowed to go out to public exercising spaces and all. And their culture plays a very significant role in the choice of people to exercise or not. So that is why if I were only understanding women and exercise devoid of the context of the place, my outlook and my understanding of that phenomena will be very limited. And that is the beauty of qualitative research and case studies, that it allows you to look at a phenomena from 360-degree, and that helps in much deeper understanding about the issue, about the topic, than simple data analysis would have provided. Case studies are generally suitable for learning more about little known or poorly understood situation. As I mentioned about, if a patient presents with a very unique disease and doctors have no idea about it, they would rather do a case study of that person, release that case study to all the doctors in the world and try to gain what these doctors have to say. And they are also appropriate to investigate how an individual or program changes over a period of time as a result of some events. So, when we are analyzing an individual or program changing over the period of time, it becomes longitudinal in nature because we are following a person over the period of time. And that is also a very deep aspect of case studies. And case studies are useful for providing preliminary support for tentative explanations regarding phenomena being studied. So, by no means they provide the full information because, as we have discussed again and again, to be able to say something about the population, the sample has to be representative of the population. But in case of this kind of study, which is case study, we are simply picking a few cases or individuals to understand to broaden our understanding about the thing. It may not be suitable to generalize, but will provide us enough information to carry forward the research. The second kind of qualitative study is ethnography, and it is basically studying of or examination of an entire group, more specifically a group that shares a common culture. So, as I explained in the earlier example of a tribal area near Nagpur, if I were interested to, understand about the health challenges of its people in the context of their cultural beliefs and their traditional beliefs and poverty and everything, what I would be doing is ethnography. So, in ethnography, and it is quite common in marketing research as well. So, the focus is on everyday behaviors of the people in the group, how they interact with each other, what kind of language they are using, what kind of rituals they observe, and certainly trying to identify the cultural norms, beliefs, and practices, and social structures and other patterns. Now, the question that comes is why should we bother to understand about a group in this manner? What is the need of ethnographic studies? What do you think?
To understand their lifestyle.
And how would the understanding of their lifestyle help us?
By studying different cultures, we will know how the tradition has changed from time to time.
Yeah. So it will help us to appreciate the diverse ways in which different people live. When we analyze specific populations, we will understand that a solution that we have designed for a particular population X to solve some kind of problem may or may not work in population Y because the way people live in that area and the customs and practices that they observe are very different. In fact, if you live with tribal people, you will see that it's a very liberal society, extremely liberal as compared to urban people, because the concepts of marriage and cohabitation and companionship are very different, at least in Gadchiroli that I had seen. People are free to explore whomsoever they want to in ways, and after 18 years of age. So that way, it really shocked me that the incidence and prevalence of cases of sexual harassment in that kind of society were really very less, which literally shocked me. But I would not have, if I would have read this piece of news in a newspaper, I might be doubtful about it. But when I went into that area and lived with the people, things started to make sense. And most of the researchers in the field of sociology or anthropology and even in health from abroad, if you have come across books by foreign authors in this domain, most of them have based their research work from the ethnographic studies they have done in India. So, and in a in a place, the culture also keeps on changing. So, ethnographic studies, in fact, what we know about Harappan culture is also somewhere coming from ethnographic studies done by people during those time, even about the different eras that our India had faced, about say Mughal era or Tughlaq era. All these kind of ethnographic studies were done, which also form a very important part of history and informs us about our present times. But over the period of time, the definition of culture has also transformed. Now we can say let's say adult work environments, elementary school classrooms, or social cliques in adolescence. So, for example, if I, as a researcher, wants to understand what is the current mental health of software developers in India during the COVID times in a particular company, so the workplace will become sort of cultural environment for me. And if I can catch hold of people and interview them, or if I can go and work in the company by seeking permission and look at the state of affairs from an insider's point of view. So what happens in ethnography is that you actually first you come into that area as an outsider, and gradually you try to mingle with people, interact with people, try to live the way they want to live, try to understand their custom, practice their custom, and gradually dissolve in the culture, and then you start understanding what is happening. And one of the very important thing about ethnographic study is that the group that you choose should be stranger, because if you know something about the group already, it is very easy for subjective bias to come into picture, and objectivity is lost. So the kind of interpretations that you will be making will suffer greatly if you are bringing with yourself a preconceived idea about the culture or the society you are going to investigate. Because detachment as a scientific skill is very important for objective research, and that is why this caution has to be maintained. Ethnographic researchers spend a long time observing and recording processes in a society. But before that to happen, as I've mentioned, they have to gain legitimate access to the site. And because they are outsiders, it is always very difficult. So, in that case, they always have to go through a gatekeeper. A gatekeeper could be a person who belongs to the community, who knows community people, and who has agreed to help the researcher. And this person can smoothen the way for researchers' entrance into the situation. When we go out in a community to do some kind of social service or talk to people or help to people, you cannot just suddenly go and talk to them, because people are by nature quite reserved. They take time to open up, and in that case, usually gatekeepers can work as an interface between researcher and the larger community. And after that, it is always up to researcher to establish rapport with and gain trust of people. And you see here, there's a very significant importance of soft skills of the researcher. Sometimes we may be tempted to think that research is only about hardcore data analysis or development of software. But there are certain other skills also which we should always strive to develop among ourselves, like communication skills or soft skills, because they help us in networking. And network is very crucial for researching, because as our network expands, our ability to look at a phenomena from all the angles improves considerably. And especially in qualitative studies, the way we talk to people, because lots of time interviews are involved. The way you establish rapport with people, the way you make them feel comfortable. These are very important things and skills which, in general, qualitative researchers have to learn. And the principle of informed consent remains vital. Any comment on what is informed consent? Do all of you understand what is informed consent and why it is important? Can anybody explain, please?
Ma'am, for uh, informed consent, we can say that we are including their data into the research, so they know that how their data will be involved for training purposes, and also we are taking them as a part of research also. So how it will affect their lives if some insight is being gained from the research itself.
Yeah, that's correct. So, these are the people who are giving us information. And because of that information, we are able to carry out our work. If it would not have been for these people, we would not have gathered the data, which we would not have used to extract information. So our work is dependent on these people. And that is why, as a gesture of respect, we must always tell them that what are we going to ask them. They should be informed in a prior manner. What are the questions and why we are doing our research? As people who are providing information, it is their right to know this. And it is their right to know how that data will be used, whether their confidentiality will be maintained or not, whether their names, even though taken during the interview, how they will be coded later on in the research. And once a person agrees to all these things, they might sign the agreement to participate in the research, which is called as informed consent. The important thing to note is that even though a person has given informed consent at the beginning, if during the research they find it difficult to continue or want to opt out, we must allow them to do so. Because at any point in the research, if the subject becomes uncomfortable, we as researchers are bound ethically to let them have a decision regarding that, even after they have given informed consent. And this remains vital to remember. So, for ethnographic studies to continue, researchers must identify a broad group of informants. You see, when you are going in a community, you want a broader group to know, to get familiar with, and then slowly you narrow down and identify your key informants who provide information and insights relevant to the research question. And they help in initiating the contacts with other helpful individuals in the community. This normally happens. I have seen it in public health. So when few of my friends would go to uh, say northeast area in India to understand a particular, I think Khasi tribes health problems, what they would do is the NGO had some sort of connection with the gatekeeper of that place, and this gatekeeper would get in touch with the researchers, and together then they would visit the families in that community and then try to talk to different families in that area. For example, I as a visitor has often visited different places with my research head, and this research head acted as a gatekeeper to the community, and she would take me to different homes in that area, and I would get to interact with these people. So that way, informants have a very important role to play. And gradually with time, researchers, after interaction with some of the people, are able to identify participants who they will be talking to in depth for their ethnographic studies. So, as the study progresses, the role of the researcher might change from being an outsider to insider. Now, there are both advantages and disadvantages of becoming an insider. The advantage is obviously the possibility to gain in depth knowledge, but the degree of detachment decreases as you become insider and the amount of emotional involvement in the project increases, so it's become difficult to objectively assess a situation. Even though this is targeted at disadvantage, some researchers argue that becoming emotionally involved is not a problem as long as ethnographers are aware of the subjective biases they might bring into their analysis. And ethnographers are required to be careful observers, interviewers, and listeners. These skills I feel always are not very much stressed upon in the lives of computer science engineers and software developers, because our focus is always different and because the curriculum is like that. But the ability to think critically is one of these abilities that even your potential recruiters will seek. Ultimately, they are searching for individuals who can solve the problem and identify the problem, not just people who can, you know, code a certain algorithm based on some problem. That obviously is important. But going forward, it will always be important how you analyze a particular new problem, how you critically analyze it and interpret it. And these skills are extremely important to learn with time. In ethnography, so as researchers interact with people, they generally make informal notes, whether on fields. Sometimes notes are not available, and these days mobiles are there, so they use voice recorders. And obviously, when we talk about voice recorders, consent has to be there. And sometimes what might happen is that suppose I speak English and the community that I'm visiting speaks Marathi, and I'm not able to understand Marathi. So the gatekeeper will sometimes also agree to work as a translator. So I talk to this person and this person talks to the people, and then the people reply to him and he makes me understand what they are saying. And in that case also, consent is important. And especially, once I had gone to this area of the BD workers that I mentioned, and while they were getting interviewed, I took my tripod and camera to videotape them. And as I was setting up uh, the device, they said no. They were not very comfortable with video shooting, and then I had to close down the equipment, and that their consent was really important. So we have to respect them, even though we want to fight, and even though their culture and ideas will seem outrageous to us most of the times. But we must remember that if we have to gather information from people, or in the long term we have to help them, we have to work with them and respect their customs and traditions, because then only we can go forward. This reminds me of a hospital that was established in Gadchiroli. So the concept behind hospital was that it was a tribal hospital. Tribal people were very afraid to go into cement hospitals because doctors there wore white coats. And in tribal culture, white was associated with death. So the idea for them to visit into hospitals wherein doctors are wearing white coat was very, you know, different for them. They already rejected it, and the founders of the hospital in that area, they tried to build shacks, and for every sort of department in the hospital they built shacks so that the tribal people felt comfortable visiting that area. And that is how they won the trust of the community, and the hospital is still functioning in Gadchiroli today. The last point about ethnographic is that it is especially useful for gaining understanding of complexities of particular social groups. So it involves a lot of time. You have to be at a place, stay with people. Sometimes researchers stay for 2 to 3 years just to understand a society and its culture. And there can be advantage such that experienced researcher knows what to look for, and disadvantage. So any amateur researcher may feel overwhelmed and distracted by unimportant details. So prior evidence or prior experience in the field of ethnographic could work both as an advantage or disadvantage. And social grounding in cultural anthropology is suggested before venturing into ethnographical studies. So ethnographical study is generally done to understand a culture of a society, and anthropology, which is a study of how human civilizations evolve with time and how they live with each other, it is suggested to get a brief of such kind of subjects before delving into ethnographic study. But as I've mentioned before, the definition of culture is changing. The workplace environment, a school setting could also work as a possible culture for us to explore. And for that, we need to have a little bit of understanding about the theory in that area. Any questions? Now we come to phenomenological study, and it is the most common type of qualitative research. And the main question is trying to answer is what it is to experience such and such. So, for example, you are actually interviewing people who are living a certain life, going under certain kind of experiences, and trying to gain from the interview what is the experience of them living in such a condition. The
Excuse me, ma'am.
example that,
This is
yes,
this is
please.
just like FGD,
Just like
FGD, focus group discussion.
focus group discussions. Yeah, so in focus group discussions, So this involves usually talking to one people at a time. In
Okay.
focus group discussions, we may have a group of 10 to 12 people where the moderator is asking questions and just observing the group as they are discussing the topic among each other.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sometimes what researchers do is individually they have interviewed people, say 20 people, for let's say 20 hours, and then they bring all these 20 people together and try to strike the debate among them about a topic. Now, second case when focus group discussions or discussions between self-help groups are important is when people are apprehensive about giving face-to-face interviews. Sometimes people are not comfortable, sharing their views with an interviewer alone, but sometimes they might feel more comfortable when they are part of the group. And that's why, based on the comfort level of the information providers, the researchers might try to go for focus group discussions. And especially when the time is less and the information they want is still important from all the people. So then also sometimes they go for focus group discussions of 40 to 40, 50 minutes, having involving 10 to 12 people in a group. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Correct.
Yeah. And so, for example, for the first year students, this is the kind of study that we will be doing when we, interview students. That what is their experience of studying in a virtual online mode in an engineering institute, and what it is like to experience the virtual mode, and what are the difficulties they are facing, and how are they coping up with it, and all these kind of things. And that will help us in understanding their perception of the meaning of an event. And that involves, so mostly for a good study, we have to have at least 30 people to interview. Interviewing 10 people will not tell you anything about the phenomenon at hand. But minimum for a good quality study, at least 35 interviews are extremely important. So it takes a lot of time to conduct this kind of study. So usually it goes into three interview series. The first interview is getting the details about the participants' life histories, getting a bit familiar about the participant and trying to understand the position they are coming from. The second would be to pin down concrete details of personal experiences related to topic under the study. So it is not still an full-fledged interview, but a preparation to the interview in which we just try to understand some of the details about their experience. So suppose in the virtual learning environment. The third is the most important part of the interview series in which we ask the participants to reflect on the meanings of their experiences. We ask them open-ended questions, and sometimes the interview is structured and sometimes semi-structured. What is the difference between structured and semi-structured interview?
Ma'am, structured interviews known or very hello.
Yeah, yeah.
Unstructured interview. Sorry, ma'am. First I will tell you about the unstructured interview. Unstructured interview will be a informal type of interview,
Hmm.
which interview sorry, which a interviewer has not a very in-depth knowledge what he will going to answer to
Hmm.
the person who is interviewing that candidate.
Yeah.
And for structured, everything is pre-planned. There's a process initiated, and that have person which needs to be interviewed have an in-depth understanding of what he might or she have to answer in that particular interview.
Yeah. It's a
Yes.
bit clear, but thank you, Shashwat.
Yes.
There's a
Yes.
more clarity needed. So in structured interview, what we do is, you make a set of questions, and these are the set of questions you will be asking to each of the respondent that you meet. But in semi-structured interview, what happens is that you still have a template of interview, you still have the set of questions, but if in the midst of the interview, your interviewee makes a very, interesting point, and then you want to take it forward from there to gain more understanding about their experience, then you can continue the conversation from there. So you can still ask open-ended questions, but it is more reflective based on their answers, and that can extend the conversation. and that is called as a semi-structured interview. And so it has a component of structure also, in that there are set of questions you are going with to your interviewee, but you also have the leeway to extend the conversation at any point of time should you feel interested in their response and want to deepen the insight that they are trying to provide. And to be able, so interviews are usually, sometimes in olden times when there were no voice recorders, there used to be transcribers who used to sit with the interviewers and would write everything that the speaker was saying. But nowadays there is recording which is available, and you can record, go back to your laboratory, listen to the interview, make a transcript of what the people said. And the good researcher, before analyzing the transcripts, will send that transcript to the interviewee, get it, sort of revised by the interview, not in the sense of revising what they have said, but just ensuring that we have been able to capture after transcription what they had said in their interview, more or less. They might not forget everything, but they will remember somewhat. So, after you have shown them the transcript and they have given their consent again, then you sit down to analyze what the data says and what it all means. Throughout the process, it is ideal to suspend preconceived notions or personal experiences, and it is very, very difficult. Interviewing is a very difficult skill to master. Sometimes we want people to answer the questions that we find are right, and sometimes interviewees also get intimidated by the way we are asking questions. And sometimes people don't give accurate answers but give acceptable answers. So there's a lot of subjectivity bias that is happening into the place, and sometimes we cannot even be sure that the information that they are giving is right, and that comes as a major limitation of interviews. But given all these limitations, this kind of study certainly provides us some amount of evidence about what is the living experience of people in such and such situation. So the idea is that after doing this particular study, after interviewing these 30 people, I prepare a manuscript and the final report, and then I hand it over to you. So by means of just the work that I have done, you should be able to understand that what it was like for these people in this particular situation to experience what they were experiencing. So that's the part of phenomenological study. Now the question arises, then what is the difference between a case study and phenomenological study? So in case study, we are doing an in-depth investigation of an individual, group, institution, or event, at max more than one. But the other kind of study is designed to understand the subjective lived experiences and perspective of the participants. So in that we need to talk to just more than one case. It is a series of cases that we want to talk to in this kind of study. And the major methods used in case study are interviews, observations, and questionnaires, whereas in the other kind of study, our major tool remains interviews. And this phenomenological study is also a philosophical movement based on the principle that certain experience can be perceived in several ways, in different ways by different people. And that becomes clear when we talk to many people, which might not be immediately apparent in case studies. The next one is narrative inquiry. It's hardly used. Most of the times, the kinds of qualitative studies used are case studies, ethnographies, which almost always result in books, and the interview series, which usually you will find published. So, for example, if you were to go back to your uh, homes today and search on qualitative studies related to psychological depression among software developers in the times of COVID, people have done interviews of these people and they've tried to identify the different causes of poor mental health among these group of people, and then try to bring it forward to the government so that they can do something in this regard. So the fourth one is, then the fifth one is narrative inquiry. It is a method of studying complex and multifaceted phenomena by focusing on recollection and stories of individuals who have had experiences related to these phenomena. So, as the word suggests, it is basically a narration of what you are trying to find. Mostly, I think it is used in narrative synthesis. You see, when you are trying to do a scoping review where mathematics and data is not required and you have to summarize all the papers in a different particular domain, then what you do is synthesizing what you have gathered from the data, and that becomes a part of narrative inquiry. And the focus is not only on events in the here and now, but also seeks to understand the past and future dimensions of events and experiences. Why? Because the narration begins to make a lot more sense when you put the current time in the context of the past developments and the future projections. The data that could be used will be autobiographical writings, histories, letters, conversations, and basically the structured and unstructured data. And then you try to make a narrative inquiry of that. And I'm reminded of a exhibition conducted by uh, Indira Gandhi when she was alive in the UK, and using the photographs of India pre-independence, she had tried to show the history of India in a narration form for the other people there to see. So that was an example in which photographs were used to narrate the history of a particular country. And obviously, for narrative inquiry, creating of rich narratives and stories that provide a fuller understanding of the setting, context, and time period is relevant. So it's not just collection of information; it is collection of an information in order to tell a story to the people so that they are better able to comprehend. In fact, when you go to museums, especially art museums and historical museum, there also you will see that the people in the museum have tried to do a narrative inquiry, and then based on the results, they have set up different sections in the museum to speak different narrations of the history. And the last one is content analysis, and it is very common again among researchers, especially who are studying arts and humanities and also the theoretical side of public health. And earlier I used to feel that content analysis is just a namesake, but it was much later in my life I realized that it is actually a scientific term which relates to systematic examination of content of a particular body of material. In fact, in abroad also during their masters, lots of students, especially those who are of Indian origin, try to do content analysis based on, for example, I had come across a student who was doing content analysis of sexually harassed victims in India based on the newspaper content. So what they do is that they specify a duration during which, if they are collecting newspaper articles, so for example, let's say January 2021 to May 2021, I will read all the newspapers of Times of India, Hindustan Times, and Hindu, and try to identify all the clips which relate to sexual harassment of women in India, and try to do a content analysis of that, and try to see in which area they are mostly occurring, what is the nature of the crime, and what is the age group of the women, and who is the perpetrator. And using all this kind of content, I will be able to arrive at a somewhat understanding of the nature of the crime or a particular event under investigation. And so the sources required for content analysis mainly are related to the different forms of communication that people use in daily lives. They can be books, newspaper, personal journals, documents, films. Bollywood, as a source of research, provides us a very rich platform to do research. So, for example, if you as a content analyzer were interested to analyze the different themes of Bollywood movies in 20th century and how it compares with the 18th century, you will see lots of differences. And then if you were to compare the Bengali movie industry with the Bollywood industry and the emerging themes in the Bengali movies as compared to the Bollywood movies, that again can be content analysis. In fact, 4 or 5 years back, I had gone to a conference in which a researcher in the arts field was presenting the results of content analysis based on movies, feminist movies in Bollywood, and he had tried to analyze that how Indian movies try to depict feminism through storytelling. So content analysis, I think it's a very creative domain to go into when you want to research about a topic in detail, and it is mostly fine in the discipline of fine arts, say movies analysis and stuff like that, in education, history, psychology, and journalism and political science. But again, it involves a great amount of planning, and I think it is a very fulfilling kind of research in content analysis. Another example I would rather give to you is that, for example, if you want to analyze the policies of a country and the documents of that policies are not easily available, so the access to the ministry is blocked and you are not able to access those documents. But almost always what happens is that whenever a new policy is launched, there is a media coverage over it, and if you could do a content analysis of these policies through media coverage, that alone also will form as a robust evidence for this. So I think if sometime in your life you do get a chance to do some kind of qualitative research, I think you must try case study based. Ethnography will take 3 or 4 years, but case study and phenomenological study and content analysis are these three areas, in which you can dabble with even in your free time and try to learn about this aspect of the research, which will definitely add to your, not only to the skill set but also the understanding of the wider world around ourselves. There are a couple of steps in the content analysis. The researcher has to identify a specific body of material to be studied. So you could be studying newspapers, or you could be studying movies, or even songs. If the sample is small, you need to study it in entirety. But if it's big and the study consists of newspaper articles, let's say during a particular time, then we have to select a sample because it is very difficult to do to read all the research papers on that area, and that is why we have to, even in our methodology, we need to write that papers were collected from January 2021 to May 2021, and all the papers during this duration were rigorously analyzed for the research problem under investigation. The researcher has to define the characteristics to be examined in precise and concrete terms, and that will come in research protocol. Again, with any kind of research, you have to have a clear research protocol, even for qualitative studies, because what it does is it helps you to organize the steps you will be doing in your research further, and it keeps you on track. If the material required in content analysis is complex, then you will likely break it down into small and manageable segments and then analyze them separately and interpret them separately. And usually, there's a single researcher that does content analysis, but if you have a group, then which are called as raters, then their rating might be required. And there is something called as inter-rating agreement and inter-rating agreement, which is important to be kept into account when doing content analysis. And content analysis are generally not just theoretical or standalone design. A systematic content analysis might be an integral part of data analysis in a phenomenological study. So it doesn't naturally have to be just qualitative in nature. If you are examining, so for example, the statistics of crimes in India against women for a given duration, then obviously in the content analysis, data will come up, and quantitative data will also form a significant component of your content analysis. So generally, quantitative component strengthens qualitative study and vice versa. So, as I said, simply counting the frequencies with which various events occurred can also form a very important part of content analysis, and adding theory and data together always gives you a fuller picture. So, it's not about this or that, it's not about qualitative or qualitative, it's about and. And with that, we come to the end of our lecture on qualitative studies. I will launch the quiz within a week, and you will be required to identify the kind of qualitative research that you will be doing in a particular research scenario. And from the next lecture onwards, we will be diving deeper, but from foundation level to the analysis of quantitative data in R. And so it would be useful if you could all install R Studio on your machines and get it running, because mostly we will be having an interactive session which will involve both theory and practical. So that's all for today. If you have any questions, please ask me. Yeah, case study can also be of crimes, right? Any questions?